Summit, the first ever presidential summit against gender-based violence that took place on November 2018. It was attended by about 1,200 delegates coming from civil society, experts and government who deliberated on how to tackle the abuse against women, of course, conversating with President Cyril Ramaphosa in this regard. And all of them came up with recommendations that were made and a declaration adopted in that gathering. What do the statistics tell us? According to the declaration adopted at the November 28th summit we just spoke about, there you have it. More than a quarter of men report rape, and also saying that between 25 and 40% of women experienced physical or sexual violence. And also, some more on the statistics, latest research from Statistics South Africa saying that women are likely to be murdered or assaulted by somebody they know, which is a sad fact of our society. And just in relation to child murders, 943 children murdered across the country, 7% decrease compared to the previous year. That's quite a good one, but let's just get into that conversation now that we were talking about in relation to the 16 days of activism. Now, Police Deputy Minister Cassel Mathale says the fight against gender-based violence and femicide is a 365-day-a-year strategy. Today marks the beginning of the annual 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Meanwhile, the National Shelter Movement of South Africa is urging government and the private sector to acknowledge the valuable role that shelters play in dealing with gender-based violence or the pandemic. To talk to us more about this conversation, we're joined via Zoom by Joy Lange from the National Shelter Movement, Glennie from the Tears Foundation, and Simamkele Dlakavu, who is a gender studies lecturer at the UCT. I see Simamkele hasn't joined us, so she'll probably be joining us later. Ladies, thank you so much for making the time. Let's start talking to you, Joy, just about the role that you play as the National Shelter Movement in terms of fighting the scourge.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity. So the National Shelter Movement is an umbrella body that has 98 members, and we provide the capacity building for shelters, and also we share resources, and we network among shelters because we understand that shelters are at different stages. You find established shelters and you find younger shelters. And more importantly, we lobby and advocate for the rights of women and children who are survivors of abuse.
The Minister in the Presidency for Women and People Living with Disabilities touched a bit on the importance of shelters, and we'll talk more on this. But let's just bring you in the conversation, Mara, just about the work that the Tears Foundation does in relation to fighting the scourge of gender-based violence.
Thank you so much. Tears Foundation was founded because I'm a survivor of abuse, and I couldn't get the help that I needed anywhere. So our ethos is bringing hope and healing. We operate nationally, and we have a free helpline, which is *134 *7355#, and we offer services to anybody who's been abused, irrespective of where you live, your age, your color, your religion, and any other item. The shelter movement, lady that's just been on right now, is 100% correct. They provide an absolutely vital service. I do, however, think that it's an underfunded area of the government, as are NGOs like myself. And I must contradict, unfortunately, the minister. No situation has been put in where they can extend past the 6 months. People are actually evicted. So I want to be very clear. I'm an angry advocate for gender-based violence in our country. And when people like the minister give us a bunch of platitudes when we need action, I can only feel angry. We need a plan going forward, and I'm not talking about the National Strategic Plan, because that's excellent on paper. I'm talking about we need action today. I'm dealing with girls of 11 years old who are pregnant by rape, who are sent home from the hospitals. I'm dealing with women who have no place to go. And if I sound strident, yes, I am absolutely passionate about the women that need help in our country. So let's stop having boss barrades and talking around a table. Let's take action. Let's join hands. We join hands with the shelter movement. We join hands with other organizations. Because guys, we can't do it alone. But let's also have the guts to speak out and say, the plans you're talking about are not working and they're not good enough. So in answer to 16 Days of Activism, last year I had a T-shirt made that said, this interview will change nothing. I didn't wear it today, but I may as well have worn it, because nothing is changing. When the Commissioner of Police for Gauteng yesterday stated that women have to do something about their rape, read the press releases. It's true. I'm not making it up. What are we supposed to do? You have to help us, men. You have to help us, police. You have to help us, Minister of Justice, because our rape statistics and abuse statistics are going through the roof. We need money, we need help, and we need support. We do not need platitudes.
And this is absolutely the type of passion that is required to try and put the point through. And Joy, as Mara was making her points, I could hear you agreeing in the background. Give us a sense, in your shelters, how easy or difficult is it to bring women through into this process? And are you able to measure the success at the end of the process? Because it's not a permanent process. It's a temporary intervention to an emergency.
Absolutely, it is a temporary intervention, and I agree with Mara 120%. And I also wanted to add that from the statistics, you can hear that it is, the minister said that it is a second pandemic. It is not a second pandemic. It is a pandemic that has been existing since before COVID came around. And so we get funding from government to only house women for 3 months. And so when the minister says 6 months, women won't be thrown out, where do we get the funding? Very many shelters actually, like in the shelter that I work in, we extend the stay to 4 months. So our intake criteria is 4 months. Most shelters do that. So they fund the additional 3 months themselves. And when you look at in our province, for example, we get only 39% of our funding from government, and we need to find the rest. So when women come in, we do our very many best to try and assist them. But at the same time, there are issues like mental health issues. Children who come in with their mothers need intervention because they've witnessed that trauma, they have experienced trauma. We need to work with that. The funding that we receive is just not enough. And so in terms of a multi-sectoral approach from government, for example, we need the Department of Health to come along. When we detect that there's mental health issues, we don't have the infrastructure to be able to deal with that. So we then go to engage with the Department of Health, for example. And that is a challenge because when you try and make an appointment for a mother or a child, by the time the mother exits, the appointment has not arrived yet because the appointment is 6 or 8 months later. And that's the backlog that we have to deal with. So in our own strength and our own capacity and networking with local businesses around us, and we are fortunate, those of us that are in urban areas. What about the woman who is 200 or 300 kilometers away from the nearest shelter in our rural areas? What's happening with women who are far stretched from the resources? The same with shelters who are placed in rural, who are existing in rural areas. They don't have the necessary infrastructure as a shelter that is in an urban area where you can actually work with corporates and local businesses to try and assist the women in terms of finding economic empowerment, because that is really what it's about, to sustain the woman. Very often, personally, I feel like we do our work well in the NGO sector, but the moment the woman leaves our gates in terms of reintegrating back into society, she falls flat because the system fails her in terms of the government departments. We're looking at when a woman exits after her time, where does she go to? Where is the concept of transitional housing for the women? Because they can't go back to that abusive environment. And so we need available and accessible and affordable housing for women who are in crisis.
Mara, you were saying that you started the Tears Foundation because you yourself didn't get sufficient help when you needed it. Now, last year, 3 new bills were introduced and approved in Parliament, and this is the Criminal and Related Matters Amendment Bill, the Domestic Violence Amendment Bill, and the Criminal Law, Sexual Offences and Related Matters and Amended Act, amended bill to the Act. Will these help in ensuring that women get help on time?
No, they won't help. The honest answer is we have fantastic legislation. We have amongst the best legislation in the world, but we do not provide the help to enable that the legislation is correctly enacted. Our people who execute the legislation are quite often, frequently under-resourced, under-educated in the needs of women, and quite honestly, a lot of the cases I deal with, which is hundreds a month. I just want to stress, we are not a small organization. We deal with hundreds of people a month. They are often turned away at the police station, at the law courts, because of legislation, because of COVID, they should have set up special COVID officers. People couldn't get protection orders. I mean, literally, we have the best laws, I think, amongst in the world. We are failing women every single day because having statutes on paper is absolutely no good. And while I'm talking about the law, I just want to mention that we have now got ourselves in this country into a serious pickle. We've all recently watched the case of a young lady who got a judgment against her rapist for rape, and it was overturned. What the judge in essence said, which I find horrifying, which will affect every rape case in our country from that day on, that consent once given is consent for all acts. So she consented to certain acts, and the judgment is available on the internet. I'm making none of this up. She consented to certain sexual intimate acts. But because she consented to them, the judge ruled that the fact that he did a full sexual act, despite the fact that she was a virgin, he was entitled to do so because she consented to the first act. How in this country can we sit here and talk about the judgments that have been made on the law when nobody is shouting out about the fact that every single case of rape in this country is going to be affected by the recent ruling? And last week I read in the newspaper that the NPA had not taken that case forward, and the time has lapsed. So we have the best absolute laws in the world and the worst implementation.
We remember that case very clearly. Acting Judge Tembeka Ngcukaitobi getting a lot of backlash for that one. Ladies, just your final thoughts. Joy, there's going to be a lot of conversations in the coming day. What is your story? What narrative are you sending out during this time?
The narrative that we are sending out during this time is that we need acknowledgement for the work that we are doing. And then secondly, we want government departments to have a more integrated, multi-sectoral approach to assist us, because we do not have the necessary means and resources to do it on our own.
Okay. Of course, Mara, we would have wanted a final thought for you, but it's a live show and we have to go to court. But thank you so much to both of you ladies for joining us this morning. Really important work that you are doing. Joy Lange is with the National Shelter Movement of South Africa, and Mara Glennie is with Tears Foundation. She is the founder. Hope to speak to you again during this time. Let's